Well, time to talk about Soviet logistics in World War II. Now, thank you everyone who voted for this topic on Patreon. Now, first off, logistics is the business of planning, preparing, providing material support for the armed forces to live, train, fight, move, and all the other stuff. So basically that they can properly function. Now, for Soviet Russia, there are a few key challenges which are usually not present, for instance, in Western Europe. There's the vast territory. Then there's overall a rather bad infrastructure. Both roads and railroads are quite different. This is also due to the vast amount of territory. Then there's Rasputista, which is the spring thaw and the rain in fall era, which basically turns everything into a huge field of mud. Thus the name General Mud. And basically, yeah, it makes movement almost impossible for most vehicles, and also due to the lack of infrastructure, most dirt roads turn into mud as well. Then there was a limited amount of industrialization, which also brings a limited amount of motorization. So this is also very important. If you look at this, the limited amount of motorization and industrialization also brings with it that, for instance, you have a more agricultural society. So less people know how to deal with cars, trucks, whereas more know how to deal with horses and everything. Which is very important because horses were also quite important for logistical reasons. Now let's look at some basics. So one major aspect of logistics will always be railways. They are there for the strategic and operational movement. Now a lower down level are basically trucks, cars and horses. They are there for operational and tactical movement. So basically they move all the stuff from the railhead to the front usually. So they are very important for the last few kilometers. Now the railways, we need to look at them a little bit historically. So in the 19th century, originally the railway was mostly ignored by the militaries. And there was a reason for this, because they realized at one point that population density is actually a very important factor in determining how well you can live off the land or not. So this also turned out very importantly in the American Civil War, when they invaded the southern territories and realized the population density was rather weak, so they needed proper railway support because they couldn't live off the land. So not enough food, not enough fodder, and other elements. And also in the American Civil War, there was a major problem with the railroad logistics and everything, and I think they hired a civilian, and he made clear principles which some author note they have to be relearned for every war sometimes, or put in print or put in writing again. And this was basically no one, absolutely no one, no officer, no medic, no soldier, nobody can interfere with the schedule of the trains. So no priorities or no special cases at all. Because this is the thing, the whole scheduling of railways and trains and everything with the different rails is a very complicated subject. So if you change anything, you have delays everywhere. And yeah, it's basically a mess. And usually other people don't notice, laymen. They look at it, oh, you just change this and that and nothing happens, but then it just blows up. Now also the Russians had quite some experience with logistical issues. First one that really happened and struck them was the Crimean War in 1853 to 56. And the follow-up was they also noted, okay, we have this problem how to move troops and supply them and everything else. Then in general, Soviet Russia had underdeveloped roads and the distances were very long. This is also very important if you look at the First World War. Armored trains were way more important on the Eastern Front than everywhere else, because the train is so important for logistics, and also in the Russian Civil War. So for armored trains, I did a video on Austro-Hungarian trains, so if you want to check that out. Now one very important about railway logistics is that the key element for them are locomotive sheds and depots, because they are refilled, they are maintained. They are water, they get the coal, they get the sand, they get the grease and everything else. And you also need to put the locomotives in sheds and protect them to a certain degree from the elements, especially in South Russia, because it's very hot in the summer and, well, I don't need to tell you that it's cold. And basically, if you take out one depot, it denies around 100 kilometers of track. So this is very important to keep in mind. So the Soviets in 1941 were very good in destroying these depots and locomotive sheds. And this created very problems for the Wehrmacht. Now the Soviets also had some high capacity lines. They were basically for one good from one source to one destination. So usually from one area where the resources were provided to one industrial area. And they shipped quite a lot of stuff there. So now let's move to the horse versus truck discussion. Because usually everyone goes, okay, the truck is way better. And the horse is, yeah, it's the poor guys, logistics, and there are these problems. But this is actually quite complicated. So a truck usually can carry more and it's faster. Additionally, if you have a truck, you can turn it off and come back 1 month later and it's still there usually. There's one huge difference. A truck is very well on roads, but once you move cross-country, the problems start to come. So wear and tear increases, it's way slower, and the capacity decreases. Additionally, you need a complex system. You need fuel, you need tires, you need roads. For instance, in Verdun 1916, the French, when they supplied with trucks and everything, they had several battalions to build up the roads and repair them and everything. And for maintenance, it's also very important to remember that in the Second World War, we still had a very large agricultural society. So most people didn't know how to fix a car. I mean, nowadays people also forget it again, and it's also way complicated. But there was a time in between where basically everyone in certain areas knew how kind of fix a car, how change a tire or something. And here we have an agricultural society, so they know more about how to deal with horses. And a truck, to a certain degree, is just a bit arcane to them. It really depends from where they were. But a large amount of the population back then still lived in the rural areas. And this is not just for Russia, this is also for Germany and other regions. So this is where the motorization of society comes into place. And I think the United States was the leading country there. Now the horse is less affected by cross-country movement than a truck. So in general on the road it's rather slow, but the speed doesn't decrease that much once it's cross-country. This is also because the wagons were usually lightweight, and the main issue with horses was usually if you had to go upwards, but then they had more horses. So they usually moved at the max speed, which was rather low, but for general they had a, you could say, a constant slow speed output. Now this also meant that they often could take the direct route cross-country, whereas trucks had to, well, find the best way. Overall, of course, they were slower, and for food it's very important. They not only fed on grass, they usually needed also fodder, especially since when they were carrying loads. So this you can't just put them on a meadow and hope everything is fine. You need to provide them with proper fodder. Additionally, they are also way more dependent on water and everything. So this meant that horses die faster than humans usually if you don't provide them with proper water and everything. Additionally, they were rather low-tech, so the maintenance amount was limited. And in general, you could say the truck generally was way stronger on paper, but you need to look at the complete circumstances to see, okay, maybe in this case a horse was better, or the difference was, the margin was way smaller than expected. This is often the case. Something on paper, it looks perfect. So if you compare a truck and a horse on paper and don't qualify for all the other factors, you will say, okay, truck all the time. And then you realize, okay, oh, I need a whole infrastructure, I need mechanics. Because, for instance, most people, to a certain degree, knew how to take care of a horse, but how to take care of a truck. And also for a horse, yeah, there are no spare parts, but for a truck, you need to build them as well. And a horse, to a certain degree, can heal, whereas a truck, well, if you leave a truck for 1 month, it's probably not gonna grow another spare part. So now let's look more to the Soviet specifics. So there's the rear, or usually called the rear services. This is a very important concept for the Soviets. That meant that every sector, the agricultural, the industrial and society, would supply the front. Now, due to their experience in Khalkhin Gol, the Winter War and in Poland, it was split between 4 commands. Now this was rectified in summer 1941 when they realized, okay, this isn't gonna work. So in August 1941 there were several changes, and for one, the rear commanders were made the deputies of the overall commanders. So they always were fully integrated in the planning, preparation of attack, defense and everything. So the fully integrated logistical aspect into the Army High Command and everywhere else. So we always had the rear guy who was next to basically the commander, and he was the deputy commander. It's a very interesting aspect. So he was not just a staff officer, he was way more important. Additionally, the whole rear office had a monopoly on transportation. This meant for instance, that the Directorate for Artillery had to go through the rear office to transport something. And H.G.W. Davie notes that it basically had a mega role. And it was equivalent to 3 to 4 positions in the German Reich. So very important. They had a strong monopoly and they focused everything there. So additionally, it was also centralized control. So usually, for instance, in a German division or something, they sent a demand from below. So they requested, okay, we need ammunition, we need food, we need that, we need spare parts. The Soviets made it different. They had centralized control, and they said only the division was in charge of food and fodder. Everything else was centralized. And it was strongly prioritized based on the fighting. So, as Davie notes, for instance, they staffed out several divisions, staffed out on quotation marks, and focused only on those who were fighting, for instance. So a strong focus on prioritization. Where do we need the supplies? Which supplies are the most important? For instance, fuel and ammo were considered the most important. Now let's look at the situation of the railways during the war. Now in 1941 the Germans overran a large part of Soviet Russia in the European area. And the Soviets as such lost about 40% of the network. Yet they were very good at evacuation, so they only lost about 15% of the motive power. So the rolling stock and the locomotives. Which meant that they had way more locomotive power and motive power to provide the whole existing or still remaining network. And this is also quite interesting. The pre-war estimates from Western Europe were basically that the Soviet railway network would collapse. This didn't happen. Now it's also very important to look at the difference in capacity. As I said before, the system was underdeveloped in comparison to Western Europe. So in the Soviet Union, you usually had for a single line 12 pairs of train per day. Whereas in Germany, internally, the Reichsbahn managed up to 72 pairs of trains per day on a single line. Now, how was this done? Well, first off, there were different speeds, so the Germans usually drove faster, which of course also increased wear and tear. And you needed more complex signaling techniques and also more qualified personnel to do this, and also more sidings so that trains could overtake each other and everything. Now, how was this solved in Soviet Russia? Basically, they used a low-tech system that just worked. So they had one speed, and it was around 25 kilometers per hour. So every train moved with that speed. This also limited the requirements for signaling and signaling personnel and everything. Additionally, wear and tear was decreased, and to increase the capacity overall, what was shipped, they used longer trains. So a Soviet train had usually around 650 tons of cargo, whereas a German train had about 450 tons of cargo. So as you can see, they had a way more simpler system, but that worked for that environment specifically and was optimized for that. Other aspects where they optimized is, for instance, you have a good track and you have a bad track. So you use the good track for delivering the stuff because, yeah, it needs to hold. and you use the weak track to return the train that is mostly empty or less filled. So wear and tear is also mitigated. Now let's move to motor transports. Now, very important, one of the aspects for Soviet logistics is H.G.W. Davie. You can also find him on Twitter, so I'll link him here. And he also helped me a bit out here with this video, with answering a question on Twitter. And what's very important is he points out that the impact of Lend-Lease trucks was actually quite limited, which was quite surprising for me because basically Alexander Hill and David Glantz point out that the Lend-Lease trucks were very important for the offensives. What Davie notes is they used a lot of trophy vehicles, so basically a lot of vehicles they captured from the Germans. Now one could now say, okay, well that doesn't make sense, but you should remember that Davie published in the Journal of Slavic Studies, for which Glantz was and Hill is now the editor. So I think now here's the point, I think the Hill and Glantz spoke more on a general level and Davie looked at a special case scenario. So I don't think it's, initially I thought it's quite a contradiction, but also the thing is here now, I think there's probably some academic discussion going on soon and we see what holds true and what not, because I think it's a bit intermingled. So again, because I'm rather new to Lend-Lease and way more newer to Soviet logistics, and these areas are, well, it seems generally a bit understudied. Now, he generally notes there was a low amount of motorization. It's very interesting. He points out that the 7th Guard Army, a complete army in 1945, had less combat vehicles than one British infantry division. And if you look at the Soviet rifle divisions, basically from 1942, but which was mostly the organization throughout the whole war, the amount of motorized weapons was very limited. They had 12 anti-tank guns that were fully motorized, 12 medium howitzers and 21 heavy mortars. Everything else was only semi-motorized or mostly carried by horses. So this is very interesting if you look at this. Now, the aspect is now, one question that came up from a Patreon Torba is, how were the quick and deep breakthroughs in 1945 and 1944 possible by the Soviets? And if you specifically look at the Vistula-Oder offensive, it turned out way faster than planned. And Davie argues this is because due to several factors. One was that the Soviets managed to capture a lot of railways intact. So the Germans weren't fast enough in destroying them and evacuating everything. Additionally, they had very well experienced railway brigades that were also now very well equipped with mechanization. So they had power drills, they had other very important tools, and they managed to rebuild bridges far faster than they assumed. Now, since you have a rapid breakthrough and it's faster than expected, you also capture more. So you have this positive feedback loop that you can capture more. And another interesting point which he brings up, now a rifle division moving 30 kilometers per day is rather fast, but this already happened in the 19th century. The issue is now you have now a combined arms division, so you have artillery, you have anti-tank guns, you have anti-aircraft guns and everything, so they are a bit more heavy than what you had in the 19th century generally. And so basically you had to relearn for the circumstances of the 20th century. And he notes the main issue is to make a proper solution for the three tyrannies, what he calls it, weight, demand and distance. So you have this trinity and you need to measure out how this works and how much horses you need, how much motorization you need in other aspects, and what you can use, for instance, where you can live off the land, the population density and everything, and other aspects. Now, it should also be mentioned that there were various issues with the rear services. There's one article from a Russian historian, Zamulin. I hadn't time yet to read it because I wanted to get the basics done first, and then I will likely at one point look at this article, and because it's basically what went wrong or what was a major problem. Now, to summarize now, What made Soviet logistics work this way? Basically, they had a long time experience with bad infrastructure and supplying a large empire. I mean, they fought in the Russo-Japanese War on the eastern edge, they fought in the Crimean War in the southern area, and they fought on various fronts over the 19th century and also the 20th century. So, specifically for Barbarossa, they had now a small network because they lost a lot of area, but they had lots of rolling stock. So they had capacity in reserve. So they could also sometimes, okay, we put that railway, we put those rolling stock on the side because we can't unload fast enough, and we prioritize other stuff. Now, and they also took the low-tech approach. So slow speed, reduced wear and tear, simple signaling techniques. So basically, just regular soldiers sometimes could provide signaling, whereas else, for instance, the German needed qualified personnel and everything, yeah. Then centralized supply with strong set of priorities. And for instance, the US Army Technical Manual from 1946 on Soviet logistics noted the rigid principles the Soviets followed. So rigid principles, strong priorities. You can say, okay, this is a rather harsh statement, but you could also say, okay, if you want to be effective, sometimes it just better works with rigid principles. And also, as noted from the American Civil War, the rigidness of nobody can change the schedule of a train is also a very rigid principle, but it just worked, unlike some Bethesda games. And the other major aspect here is the modern logistical system. So they had integrated the logistical aspect, the logistical command into the command of the armies and this monopoly on transportation. So very strong focus on getting the logistics right, which is very important on the Eastern Front, or for the Soviet it was actually the Western Front. I think I never pointed this out, but yeah, it's kind of, you have to say this once in your lifetime. So, a big thank you here to everyone who voted on this topic on my Patreons, and also especially to Torva for asking the question on the breakthrough. And also to Peter for sending me the article from Davie about the railway logistics on the Eastern Front. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.